matter for 10 minutes. And I hope, I thank you, Presenter, Mr. Dos Santos, the Executive Director of UNESCO. I understand this report will occur every year. If I'm not current, you provide to me. But I do understand you have a report for some few years back in terms of inclusion, in terms of all means of, specifically if you want to extract a report from Tanzania. I know it's a global report, but there are specific issues concerning Tanzania. Are we making any progress in terms of inclusion, specifically education, in your general assessment?
Thank you. Thank you, the coordinator. I will pick different ends so that we can be able to collect. We can go 4 or 5. I will, before you, I'll go to the director from the Institute of Education, and then we'll come to the doctor there, and then we'll come back to Madam Obeno. So, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm not a director. I have a few things to comment with regard to this report, Mr. Santos. And one is with regard to what you have recommended in your report to say addressing the questions of inclusion should involve getting all teachers should be prepared to teach all students. So I'm wondering how could this be done? I think it is like becoming much more ambitious. And again, when you were saying that we also need to engage the universal designs, to apply universal designs, and I was wondering, should we go with context-based designs just per country, just per localities, or should we embrace on having universal designs that the global report is education? But the last thing is on what I got in the data that he presented with regard to the inclusion. I think we have a common problem in the country with the coordination. I think is what you are talking here on the governance in regard to that. The problem of coordination, that means there is a lot of efforts that we are doing, that the CSOs are doing, that the NGOs are doing in the country. And it might be the same in other countries of the world, but what they do included in the reports, because I'm wondering, we might be saturating the efforts in some locations and other locations being left behind, to the point that when we report, we find that we are not actually making any progress. We still live much more untouched with the interventions while we saturate efforts some locations. So there is an issue of coordination. And I think yesterday the Commissioner was talking about this, that it is important now that whatever we do should be coordinated so that we will be able to report the progress that we are making as a country. And this will address the question of whether what we are doing is being recognized in the countries. Because the recognition of what we are doing will also help to reduce the figures that are being reported, that we are leaving behind much of the beneficiaries that are supposed to be included in the report. So I wanted to comment on that, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You have raised almost like 3 or 4 questions. So if you can keep at least 2, will help. Thank you so much. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. Again, my name is Dr. Mari. I also thank Mr. Dos Santos for this report, reflection on this report. But my question is really on the conceptualization of inclusive education. When we're talking about inclusive education, it seems like the conceptualization has focused on access. But we know, even yesterday when the former president presented to us, he said only 67% of of children complete standard 7 or primary education. You have 33 dropping out. And we don't really have, we have little research going beyond access and getting into acceptability and adaptability of this being called inclusive education. And I think if you could help us with that, and maybe we can find a way of retaining those that are dropping out of school because of the maybe learning environment is not really that acceptable in terms of pedagogy and in terms of content of what is being learned, and also is not really adapted to the learning needs of the learners.
Thank you, Doctor. And Mr. Santos, is this enough or should I increase the numbers?
No, we can begin.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
The board is yours.
I don't know if I will have answers to all questions that have been raised. Some might actually need much more research for us to respond them. One question was asking if Tanzania is on target insofar inclusion is concerned. We have mentioned a few data here about Tanzania within the report that I will remind you shortly. But I wanted to acknowledge that insofar the concept that Tanzania has adopted on inclusion, it is much more advanced than what we observe in many countries. My colleague here just mentioned what types of target populations the concept in Tanzania considers. But when it comes to addressing the needs of those populations, we cannot be satisfied with the level that we have achieved. We mentioned the issue of albinism, that almost half do not even have the access, let alone the quality of. So I think there is a lot of progress, but there is much more we can do. And I would like to link this question with the question on coordination. I don't know, the Commissioner of Education is here and is listening to us. You know, when it comes to whether the CSOs and NGOs contribution is really recognized and given due consideration. One would want to see how those CSOs and how those NGOs adhere to the policies put in place by the government as well, because it would be difficult for the government to recognize something that is not in conformity with its policies and its regulations. So I would think that from the constatation that the coordination needs to be improved, perhaps what we need to do is to really engage in a further dialogue on how the diversity of stakeholders can contribute to inclusive education, but with the premise that, you know, we also have to consider the viewpoint of the government. If there are laws, if there are the regulations, those regulations have to be taken into account. Perhaps that would make it easier for your interventions to be recognized. the quality of the concept of inclusion emphasizing access rather than quality. Well, in terms of defining the concept itself, I would think that both access and the quality are part of the concept. After all, as we implement SDG 4, we are looking at quality education. Now, the problem is, do we have the ingredients that would lead to an adequate implementation that leads to that kind of quality or not? And as you know, we acknowledge not all teachers are prepared to teach within these concepts, and perhaps that is one area that we need to recognize the importance, and therefore put in place programs that will really empower the workforce in education to teach along those needs to improve not only access, but to ensure that those who have access also come out with the education of quality, and also the performance of the system is improved in terms of generating as many of those enrolled as graduates. Universal designs. Well, when we talk about the universal designs here, we are not saying that Tanzania has to have the same design as Mozambique or as Sweden. But we are saying that there are universal concepts that we need to bear in mind as we design our programs. We talked here, for example, about the illustration of our textbooks that in some cases leave a lot to be desired. We mentioned the issue, the examples of Pakistan here, but I'm sure even with our textbooks, if we look at them closer, we might find that you know, there are aspects that are not consistent with this concept of inclusion. I don't know if I missed.
There was a question about the data and some ambitions. Is there any way that?
That what is required to that's one in my notes.
Okay, yeah. It was a question where he was saying that what we're trying to say is kind of being more ambition. You have covered it in your coordination mechanism.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Santos. I think the way you come up with the response, it kind of fit in, but if there isn't anything from the surveyor, we'll be able to ask us more questions. So I'm opening up for other hands so that we can continue. I remember I ended somewhere there, so please, madam, if you can go ahead. But before you go ahead, we have a hand at the second row. I'm looking, and then we have another one, the third, and then we have from the middle there, the fourth, and the fifth. Thank you so much. Please reconsider your numbers and proceed.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good, elaborative, and global. Tanzania, we are among the countries when you talk of inclusion, we have mentioned the groups of children to be included. There are about 8 of them. But to me, the group which is most vulnerable are children with various disabilities, considering their conditions and their specific needs. Well, regarding access, we know most of the children are not being enrolled. They are still at home. And there are many CSOs that are working with the government to make sure that work together to ensure that these children, because they have right to education, then they give access. Well, we have been parents to send their children to school, those are parents with disabilities. And some have agreed and they've been enrolled in schools. But then when they come to school, there are so many barriers, challenges, which make them not to stay in school, but end up dropping out and going back home. For example, when teachers are not trained how to handle these children, that is the most important area which the children can't cope with, because the children are not included in the learning. And when they are not learning, then what are they doing in school? Well, for those who are in school, the school environment is not conducive to learning. Most buildings are not accessible. They are not accessible toilets for those who manage to get their wheelchairs. There is no school feeding. And for example, there are some schools where there are no ramps. And when there are ramps, they don't even facilitate entrance to the buildings. Some pose danger to the pupils because they are very steep. And I felt to imagine if there are standard designs which the contractors are given so that they can build accessible buildings. And then another thing is that for those who drop out, who can't be in school, they go home and there is no attention for them. And for those who manage to stay in school, especially those who are with intellectual impairment, when they reach class 7, most of them are unable to proceed to higher institutions. So they go back home. And we know that they are growing. They depend on their parents, but at the end of the day, they are grown up with the right to get married, to earn a living. So what plans does the government have so that these get some skills, vocational skills, for example, carpentry, tailoring, animal husbandry, and similar skills so that they can earn a living, either by being employed or employ themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Yevena. The question was, the issues were quite many, but eventually you let us know that you wanted to know what strategies are there for children with disabilities to access vocational education. Thank you. The second.
Yes, my name is Mr. Majura Edward. I work with Child Support Tanzania, and actually we have inclusive model school, and I welcome all of you to come and learn. We're doing a great work there. Sasa, I want to comment on the presentation was good, but there's an issue of examination accommodation. And the report highlighted at some point, I read the report earlier, highlights the issue of examination to children with disability. I think it was 4 years ago when we recommended to the government that at least they change some of the modality of the examination, especially for children with disability, because hawezi kumpima tembo na nyani kwenye kupanda mti mmoja. So there must be a different examination for children with disability, and there must be a good structure to accommodate children with disability. For example, they need frequent breaks, they need resting time, we need to allow them to extend the time, such a matter. So I think the government and the organization should find a way to accommodate children with disability when it's come to examination. Now the government has improved. They have a large fund for children with a low visual. But I think we need to now to extend for the children with other disability, for example, intellectual or other areas like Down syndromes, for accommodating them during examination, because we take these kids to the schools and then they don't participate in examinations. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madura, and probably that example doesn't really suit me. So next time we'll use it, because sometimes somewhere we might fail to know who is the elephant and who is the nyani. So yeah, so please next time
Thank
we are
you.
very careful for whatever you are saying.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. I'm going to the third presenter for the question. Welcome. I think it was you. And then you are number 3. So proceed with it.
Thank you so much. My name is Alaina Mandoroma, Executive Director of an NGO called Secondary Education for Girls Advancement, based in Morogoro. Thank you, Mr. Santos, and of course, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity. I have a question. Thank you first, Mr. Santos, for highlighting about government giving space for non-state actors to contribute to inclusion. My question, I'm not sure how Mr. Santos will respond it, or if anybody from the government, maybe Madam Chair, you allow the commissioner or anybody from the government to respond to it. But I was wondering, how is the government preparing itself to improve its engagement with the private or non-state actors? Because like now we know we are moving, the government is moving to e-government, and we have a lot of information that we non-state actors are supposed to communicate with the government through e-government system. But still I feel that there is lack of coordination between the government ministries. You find you have the registrar of NGOs, for example, on one hand, you have TAMISEMI, you have the Ministry of Education, they all require different information from you. And my question is how now the government is preparing itself to improve the space and appreciation to non-state actors to participate with a friendly environment. Sometimes you go to the offices, some offices makes you feel bad, like feel you are not wanted, feel like the government is not needing your service. Things are just complicated in some offices.
Thank you so much, Madam from Morogoro. I know that in responding to the coordination component, he tried to bring it out to the aspect of where we are and how the government could do the coordination. I do think that all of this needs to be posted somewhere else, because it's much more of how the organization are registered, while our topic is much more of how we coordinate our effort on inclusive education to make sure that our data and information are becoming known and they are included as part of the process. And I understand it underneath, you wanted to unpack that. If your organization is not included, probably what you are doing might not go and be able to be accessed and used by the government. But we are in the second, the former part, but we are not in the. I think you understand that we will not be able to address on that. So welcome for another question. And of course, in your response, you'll be able as well to provide some further information if you have.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm the National House from Lucas. I'm happy to see this global report that has been shared to us by Santos. Thank you so much. But again, I'd like to know whether we have country-specific reports that are reflecting this global report, so that we are able to understand the specific issues in the country. Like now, do we know how much teachers are faring with inclusive education? Do we really understand how they are really prepared to handle these mixed classes? Like now, maybe they know that it's just a matter of mixing or it's a matter of inclusion. The definition is clear. by the teachers so that they are able to really handle issues like identifying children with difficulties so that they know how to help them. Sometimes it's difficult to them. So please, if you have any hand, be happy to
Thank you. And actually, I will add my question there because this was also another challenge, especially for the teachers in the aspect of the definition of the inclusive education, being able to have a class where all could learn. Some teachers, they had some reflection that it might be a challenge for them to have all the categories, for example, children with disabilities. How will they be able to handle with the current system and the curriculum? For example, for those who are intellectually impaired or for those deafblind, they need extra support. So probably to combine on the ability to understand the needs, but also the ability to be able to deliver the lessons while you have a mix of the classes. Thank you. I have a question. And that will be the last because Taji, you are here. So, but I remember I still have like 10. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've taken a note on the starting time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Mr. Santos, for the good presentation. My question comes from the recommendation of empowering the education workforce. I'm looking on the situation where we have majority of incompetent teachers as far as inclusive education is concerned, and the overcrowded classrooms, perhaps some of the classrooms with high ratio or with high number of children or learners with disability. So I'm thinking or I'm asking of that you need to look on other approaches or techniques in which we can ensure that we deliver effective inclusive education and we are not demoralizing our teachers, meaning that a teacher having a class with 100 students and among those students with 6 to 10 children with disability. Other approaches like the one, for example, of using assistant teachers or someone to support teachers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you mentioned yourself with the video.
My name is Rebecca. I work with IQEC International. Action on Disability Development.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was listening to the questions, I was wondering whether some were really questions or a plea to consider things that you feel are missing. And in those cases that you would agree with me that it was a plea so that those things happen, I would suggest that they make part of the conclusions and the recommendations of this conference so that they can be followed up at a later stage in adequate forums, most of them involving really government and stakeholders. That would apply, for example, to Madame's question on the design of the setup of schools that do not allow children to access, children with disabilities to access, because there are no ramps and many other things she mentioned. The issue of a curriculum vis-a-vis, what those children will be capable of doing, such as TVET that Madame also was proposing. That is something that can be seen more as a recommendation to those that might be designing the curriculum, rather than perhaps a response from this side of the table, if you would agree, Madame. Same as the question, is more of a statement from the gentleman here, I felt that it was a plea for something rather than a question, and so I will put it in the same category. There was a specific question on whether there are specific reports. You know, this is a global monitoring report that UNESCO develops every year. When it develops this report, for the development of this report, it gets data from as many countries as possible. We have a specialized Institute of Statistics that collects data from countries, and those data are used to develop this global picture of how we are managing. But in the report itself, you will find data from specific countries or regions. That's as much as we go. But it would be interesting if Tanzania itself developed, maybe not every year, but in a certain interval, a picture of how are we going. You know, so I would leave that again as one suggestion that could come from this conference. But the response is that UNESCO is not developing country-specific reports. Uses data from various countries to put together this global monitoring report. And in relevant areas, it includes some statistics from regions and countries.
Sorry, Mr. Santos, you talk about this specialized institute of statistics.
Yes.
Is kind of a global structure, or is it
Yeah,
also in country? Is there any way, for example, a lady in Morogoro could share this information, or it has to pass it through government?
You know, it liaises with governments. You know, data from countries, we cannot ask anyone to provide data. So there is official data that comes from the census, from the education census as well. We have been working with the governments, including in Tanzania, in strengthening their EM system, education management information systems. And it is those systems that channel the information to UIS. The delivery of education, you know, in when you have different characteristics of children, how is that possible? That was one of the questions. I don't know. You know, what the report is saying is that we needed to expand the concept beyond just the people with disability, to include people with other characteristics. How do we do that? You know, in the specific setting of a school, there are many things we need to consider. The report is suggesting that integrating people with disabilities within regular schools is probably better, because if you are putting them in the special schools of their own, you might not get as many. But if you integrate them in schools, it's better. But it is not saying that to put them all together in one classroom. There are countries that have put together policies that in each primary and secondary school, they have 1 or 2 classrooms for people with disability. Even in those, they don't mix, for example, blind with deaf. They require different things. So, you know, it depends really on how we will approach But if we think that we will build, specialized schools to deal with those disabilities, we have our doubts whether, how many will you build? How would the child in Morogoro come to attend a school that is in Dar es Salaam? And I'm sure it will be difficult in the near future to replicate all these schools in the districts where you could probably have more children without the need to put them in hostels. So it depends on the context in which we are analyzing those things, and probably not better to look at them in a general, even for Tanzania alone, it may not be just one model that apply everywhere. So I would suggest that we give more thought to that.
1 minute to comments.
Mhm. And actually, I only have the last question, which it was on the overloaded classrooms and what approach to avoid demoralizing children, teachers. Our impression is that, many teachers the world over, and in some cases also in Tanzania, are really not trained to address people with those special needs. So the first thing that we are suggesting here in the report is that those subjects are included in the curriculum of teacher education schools. It is not a good way to get a teacher out of the college, graduate, and then to think next year about providing him with the in-servicing courses to add these elements. It's better we include them already in the curriculum, and as many as possible come out of the teacher training college already with those abilities. If we will need to refresh, then the necessities will also be lower. I submit.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining hands actually to congratulate Mr. Santos for the very good presentation. But probably, Taji, before you address, it would be good to get some, because I'm aware that the government have done some number of initiative. You might, the commissioner might have some very key responses, or you don't have. That's good. But I'm aware that there are some of the things that have been done. I know that you are coming from a different country, and I would like really to get that experience. If you can speak it quickly and not, eliminating some of the stories before we go away.
Good afternoon. Lesotho has taken a lot of strides when it comes to inclusive education. We have a working inclusive education policy, which we are now, as civil society, then trying to get it to actually start being implemented. Obviously, COVID made it a bit more difficult because it was passed in 2018. 2019 was just getting the policy to be like everybody to know about it. So implementation ideally was supposed to be 2020, but now we are back speaking with the ministry about inclusive education policy being implemented. I honestly love the definition you gave when it comes to inclusive education, because we as Lesotho also have a non-formal education policy, which has been working with the children who are out of school for them to be somewhat included. But since those policies are implemented separately, I think that would be detrimental into what we're trying to do. So if it were included as one policy, I think it would be a good thing. But having these documents do help in that we have some sort of guidance. I think for us, honestly, we've taken a lot of strides where, although the building of structures has been the most difficult, that is why we really have been advocating for inclusion, that let the structures that we already have be upgraded to include certain students. Let the teacher, since right now we're going through the reforms process as a country, let's also reform our curriculum to start including certain subjects so that the educators can have some of this information, so that when an educator goes into a classroom and they find a child who needs certain assistance, they're not stuck, they're not overwhelmed. So that is some of the things that we've been advocating for as civil society. Our special education unit in the country has been somewhat welcoming to our strides, but you know, it's never easy to actually say these things are going to happen over one night or over one day, but it's a work in progress, and that's what I can say for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the, that's actually helped us in winding up, and just to summarize this discussion, I think we somehow in the discussion, Mr. Santos mentioned that in terms of the concept and the documentation and plans, we are, as Tanzania, we are quite ahead, only that we needed to do more. That is a statement which I picked. And I'm quite aware that we have already produced 2 different strategies, and now we have the third one. And within the third one, I'm quite aware that there are also some areas that have been proposed which are quite positive, including having probably we'll have also some more supporting mechanism in class. But also you have mentioned from the child support that the exams, they have been incorporating the visual, but we need to do more. So I do think that we are making a very good progress, and I'm quite aware that also there is a model that the Disability Inclusive Development Consortium partners, they are working with government to produce that. So I'm quite confident that we will reach there, but I also wanted to recognize that all that you have mentioned, all the 3 in terms of the vocational and probably the alternative path of education that we were informed the other time, all this needed to consider the aspect of the inclusive, but I'm quite aware also the commissioner has taken a note in terms of how we can work together to make sure that our curriculum become really inclusive, and our children can as well be able to learn the same as others. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And also I'm really helpful that also we have the audience that people with disability within this. I know that even after that, they might follow us for further discussion. We can elaborate on other areas and other aspects. And thank you so much, Mr. Santos, for having time. I don't know if you have any word or we need to.
Just a word of thanks for your attention and for your questions. I must say that I picked on some of your questions for my own reflection afterwards, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All is all, right?
Yes.
Exactly. What a wonderful session that was. Mr. Santos was a very resourceful speaker. It was wonderful listening to you, drawing from the experiences. We appreciate that very much. And Rose, you run it really well, eh? So many issues, and you're also very knowledgeable. Asante-san. So I think you've set us up very well for lunch. And when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, 2 sessions, and they're both very, very exciting. I wonder whether you've looked at your timetable. The first one will be done by Mr. Ochola himself. And so please be the first one to eat. So we can come back and wait for everyone, but I'll make sure everybody comes in quickly.
and you'll be discussing the future of higher education. Are we financing the right causes? So there's the future, there's the financing of the right causes, and what went wrong in HE subsector? Why graduates are not being employable? Now look at the number of people that will be attending. I can tell you now, number 2 is Zephania Maduhu with excuse. Everyone else is there, but these are very resourceful as well. We look forward to your presentation. And also Dr. Chris Mauki was sitting up there with me. By the way, that corner there is not very cold. There's no AC there. And he'll be doing the role of the private sector and corporates in enhancing quality education. Very important. We'd like to acknowledge the corporates that are sponsoring us for this conference. Bon appetit, ladies and gentlemen. See you soon. When you're done, please tell your partner at table A, let's go back. There's some important things to do. How does that sound? Excellent. See you soon.